The rhythmic hum of the factory machines was all Shepard had to keep him company during his late-night shifts. Sparks flew around him as his welding torch met metal. He worked with steady determination, ignoring the ache in his back and the weight of exhaustion pressing on his shoulders. With every completed weld, Shepard imagined the bright smiles on the faces of his wife, Alina, and their 12-year-old son, Evan. He pressed on for them, dreaming of giving them a better life than the one he had known. During a rare break, his friend and coworker Johnny plopped down on a bench beside him, the scent of burnt metal lingering around them. Johnny took a swig from a soda can and nudged Shepard with his elbow. "Man, you're working yourself into an early grave," Johnny said with a chuckle. "What's the plan with all this overtime? Got a secret yacht you're saving up for?" Shepard grinned, the weariness momentarily lifting. "A yacht? Hardly. I'm thinking more along the lines of a family vacation. Alina's been talking about taking Evan to the coast. I want to make it happen." Johnny leaned back and nodded approvingly. "That's what it's all about, isn't it? Family." Shepard's smile softened. "Yeah, they're worth every minute here." The whistle signaling the end of the shift blared through the factory. Shepard wiped his hands on a rag and stood, feeling every muscle protest. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said, giving Johnny a wave as he headed out. The drive home was uneventful, the pre-dawn streets quiet except for the hum of his truck's engine. As he turned onto his street, he noticed his brother Jared's pickup truck parked in front of his house. His brow furrowed. Jared rarely visited and never unannounced, especially not at this hour. Shepard parked and walked toward the house, unease creeping into his chest. The front door was unlocked, and as he stepped inside, the faint sound of laughter drifted down from upstairs. Alina's laughter, warm and familiar, but accompanied by a deeper voice. Shepard stood frozen for a moment, the sound twisting like a knife in his gut. He set down his lunchbox quietly and moved toward the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. His breathing quickened, anger mixing with disbelief. He reached the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar, and pushed it open. The scene inside struck him like a physical blow. "What the hell?" he roared, his voice cracking with fury. Alina shot up, clutching the sheets to her chest. Her eyes widened in terror, her face pale. Jared stumbled out of bed, scrambling for his clothes. "Shepard!" Alina cried, her voice high-pitched and desperate. "It's not what it looks like." Shepard's eyes darted between the two of them. His hands trembled, fists clenching so hard his nails dug into his palms. "You," he spat, his gaze fixed on Jared. "My own brother?" Jared couldn't meet his eyes. He fumbled with his shirt, his words a pathetic mumble. "I didn't mean it just happened." Shepard took a step forward, his fury palpable. "Didn't mean to? You didn't mean to crawl into bed with my wife." His voice rose, the betrayal ripping through him. He turned to Alina, his chest heaving. "After everything, all these years, why?" Alina's lip quivered. "Please listen to me. I'm sorry. I don't know. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Shepard's voice cracked with disbelief. "This isn't a mistake, Alina. This is a choice. Your choice. Please," she begged, reaching out with trembling hands. "Let me explain. We can work through this." Shepard recoiled as if burned. "Work through what? This?" He gestured wildly at the rumpled sheets, the damning evidence of their betrayal. "Get out," he said, his voice low and cold, a deadly calm replacing the fury. "Both of you." "Shepard," Jared began, stepping closer. "Don't make it worse. Shut up." Shepard's shout echoed through the room. "You think you can speak to me? After this?" Jared backed away, guilt and cowardice etched on his face. Alina hesitated, tears streaming down her cheeks, but Shepard's expression left no room for argument. Defeated, she pulled on her clothes with trembling hands. Jared grabbed his boots, avoiding Shepard's gaze as he shuffled past him. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving Shepard alone. The silence was deafening. Shepard stood there, his legs suddenly weak. He sank to the floor, his head in his hands. Memories of laughter, late-night conversations, promises made, and shared dreams, all of it shattered in an instant. He stared at the space where they had been, feeling like a stranger in his own life. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time lost all meaning. Eventually, Shepard forced himself to stand. He walked through the house in a daze, every corner reminding him of their life together. He found himself in the kitchen, where Evan's drawings were still taped to the fridge. Shepard traced one with a shaking finger, a stick-figure family of 3, holding hands. He clenched his jaw. "Not anymore," he whispered. Shepard grabbed a duffel bag and began packing. Clothes, documents, a few personal items. He moved like a man possessed, each action fueled by a mix of fury and pain. When he reached their shared safe, he emptied it of cash and important papers. He took everything that belonged to him, everything they had built together. It was his turn to leave them with nothing. Before he walked out, Shepard left a single note on the kitchen counter. He didn't bother with flowery words or long explanations. Just the brutal truth, stripped of emotion. "You stole from me, betrayed me, and planned to ruin me. I'm leaving you with what you truly deserve, nothing." With that, Shepard walked out of the house, leaving behind the life he had once cherished. As the sun rose, he drove away, determined to bury the pain and start anew. The past was behind him, but its ghost would haunt him for a long time to come. The days after the betrayal passed in a blur for Shepard. He moved through life like a ghost, unable to shake the burning images of Alina and Jared together. Sleep became a distant memory. He walked through their house, like a stranger, his fingers tracing walls that no longer felt like home. Every photo, every object seemed like a cruel reminder. Alina was always there, either hovering nearby or trying desperately to speak to him. "Shepard, please," she would beg, blocking his path in the hallway. "Talk to me. Just listen. I was wrong. I know I was wrong." Shepard's eyes were cold, his jaw clenched. He said nothing and stepped around her as if she were invisible. One evening, as Shepard stood in the garage staring blankly at the workbench, he heard soft footsteps behind him. "Shepard," Alina's voice cracked. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean for this to happen. We can fix this. We have to." "Stop," he said, his voice low but firm. "Just stop." She stepped closer. "We can get counseling. We can get out." Shepard's tone was final, brooking no argument. She faltered, eyes wide with shock, then retreated. Over the following weeks, Alina's pleas grew more frantic. She left notes on his pillow, slipped letters into his work bag, and tried to corner him whenever he was home. "It's not just for me, Shepard. Think of Evan," she said one night, desperation dripping from every word. He turned to her, eyes blazing. "Think of Evan? You didn't think of him when you slept with my brother. Don't you dare use him now." Her tears fell freely, but Shepard had already turned away, shutting himself off from her words. One rainy afternoon, Shepard returned from work earlier than usual. He had hoped for some quiet, but instead, he found Alina's phone buzzing incessantly on the kitchen counter. He picked it up and saw a string of messages from Jared. "We need to talk. Did you get everything sorted? We can't wait much longer." His hands shook as he scrolled through the conversation, piecing together fragments of their plans. They had been siphoning money from their shared accounts for months. The savings he had worked so hard to build gone. Rage coursed through him, but beneath it was a deep, gnawing ache. It was never just about the affair. It was about betrayal on every level. That night, Shepard didn't confront Alina. He didn't shout or demand explanations. He quietly made plans. He visited the bank and drained their joint accounts. He met with a realtor and arranged to sell the house. He moved with a cold, calculating efficiency that surprised even him. 2 weeks later, Shepard stood in the empty living room, the last box in his hands. He looked around at the barren walls, the silence echoing. It had once been filled with laughter and love, or at least the illusion of it. He set the box down and pulled out a pen and a sheet of paper. His hand was steady as he wrote. "You stole from me, betrayed me, and planned to ruin me. I'm leaving you with what you truly deserve, nothing." He placed the note on the kitchen counter, where Alina would be sure to see it. Then he picked up the box, walked out the door, and didn't look back. Shepard drove for hours, the miles slipping away beneath him. He changed routes frequently, unsure of where he was going, but certain of one thing. He had to be far, far away. When exhaustion finally forced him to stop, he checked into a cheap motel. The room was small, the bed lumpy, but it was a place to rest. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything crashing down. The next day, he made more arrangements. He changed his name, set up new bank accounts, and found a place to stay in a small, unfamiliar town. He took on whatever work he could find, rebuilding from scratch. Each task, no matter how menial, was a step away from the past. He refused to let the memories consume him, burying himself in work until his muscles burned and his mind was too tired to think. Months passed. Shepard became someone new, someone who didn't flinch at the mention of betrayal or glance over his shoulder for ghosts. But sometimes, late at night, he would sit in a small apartment, staring at nothing. The pain wasn't gone. It had just been locked away. He focused on building a new life, learning new skills, making connections, and slowly amassing wealth again. This time, he trusted no one but himself. One evening, as he closed a business deal that would significantly boost his new company's prospects, Shepard allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had done this on his own. He had survived, and he had thrived. The man who had been broken in that house was gone. In his place stood someone stronger, harder, a man who had learned the cost of trust and the power of cutting all ties. The past had scarred him, but it no longer defined him. Shepard raised a glass to himself that night. Alone, but free from the weight of betrayal, he vowed never to be caught off guard again. Shepard stood in front of the wide glass windows of his apartment, looking down at the city below. 10 years had passed since he walked away from the ashes of his old life. Now he was a man transformed, a successful entrepreneur with a company he built from scratch. The scars of betrayal had shaped him, but he had found a semblance of peace in his new life. His solitude was shattered by the harsh buzz of the doorbell. He frowned. He rarely had unannounced visitors. He moved to the door, his steps measured and calm. As he swung it open, the sight before him brought the past crashing back. Alina stood there, a hollow version of the woman he had once loved. Her once bright eyes were shadowed, and her gaunt face told a story of years of hardship. Beside her was Evan, no longer a child, but a young man. He was tall and lean, with a hardened expression that mirrored Shepard's own. "Shepard," Alina whispered, her voice trembling. She swallowed hard, fighting to maintain her composure. "I didn't know where else to go." Shepard leaned casually against the doorframe, crossing his arms. The corner of his mouth curved into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You shouldn't have come here." She stepped forward, her hands shaking. "Please just listen. Evan is in trouble. He's been arrested. We need help. We need money for bail." Tears pooled in her eyes, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "There's no one else." Shepard's eyes flicked to Hugo, Evan's brother. The young man stood stiffly, his jaw clenched. He looked everywhere, but at Shepard. "Is that true, Evan?" Shepard asked, his voice flat. Hugo met his gaze with cold defiance. "I don't need anything from you. But my brother—" Shepard let out a dry chuckle. "Good. Because you won't get it." He turned back to Alina, his smile vanishing. "Why are you really here? To beg? Or to remind me how low you can go?" Alina stepped forward, desperation flashing across her face. "Shepard, it's not about me. It's about him. He's lost, he made mistakes, but he doesn't deserve to rot in jail. I'm asking for him." Then she screamed, "You abandoned us. It's your fault he grew up without guidance." Shepard's chuckled, eyes hardened. "Shut the fuck up. I abandoned a woman who was sleeping with my brother while I worked night shifts to provide for her. You think I owe you anything after what you did?" She flinched as if struck, but quickly composed herself. "I know I don't deserve your kindness, but he's your son," Shepard interrupted, a cruel edge in his voice. He turned and picked up a thick envelope from a nearby table, tossing it at her feet. "None of mine." Alina's trembling hands picked up the envelope, and as she read the DNA results, her face turned deathly pale. The paper slipped from her grip, fluttering to the ground. "You knew?" she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the revelation. "Of course I knew." Shepard's tone was cold, each word a dagger. Do you think I'd spend 10 years rebuilding my life without digging up every rotten detail of what you did? I know everything. Alina staggered back a step. Shepard, I didn't know. I thought. She turned to Evan, who stared at her with a mixture of shock and betrayal. I thought he was yours. Spare me the lies, Shepard snapped. I'm done listening to your pathetic excuses. Alina dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Please, Shepard, we have nothing. We've been living paycheck to paycheck. Jared left us with nothing. And Evan, he's my son, but he's your blood too. He needs help. Shepard's gaze shifted back to Evan. The boy's face was a mask of pain and confusion. Is that what you wanted you and your brother want, Hugo? To come here and watch her grovel? To ask for scraps from the man she betrayed? Hugo's eyes blazed with anger. You think I want to be here? I don't need you. I never did. Shepard stepped closer, his presence menacing. Then why are you here? Why stand at my door? Because I had no choice. Hugo spat. Because she dragged me here to beg from the man who left us to rot. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Alina's sobs filled the air, but Shepard ignored her. You're right. I left you both to rot, and it was the best decision I ever made. You heartless bastard, Hugo muttered, his fists clenching at his sides. Shepard raised an eyebrow. Heartless? Maybe, but I'm no fool. I saw through the lies and saved myself. I won't apologize for it. Alina pushed herself to her feet, wiping her tears away. Shepard, whatever anger you have, take it out on me. But please, don't turn your back on him. Shepard's jaw tightened. For a moment, he considered slamming the door in their faces and walking away. But instead, he leaned in close to Alina, his voice low and venomous. You don't get to ask anything of me. Not after what you did. She grabbed his arm, her grip weak but desperate. I'm begging you. For him, not for me. Shepard stared at her hand on his arm, then at her tear-streaked face. With a swift motion, he shook her off. Get out of my sight, he growled. He stepped back and moved to close the door. Alina's eyes widened in panic. Please, he's your son. Shepard paused, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. Slowly, he turned to face her one last time. No, he's yours. And this, he gestured to the cold, empty space between them. This is what you created. Before Alina could respond, Shepard shut the door. He leaned against it, the sound of her muffled sobs echoing through the wood. He closed his eyes, the weight of old wounds pressing down on him. He could hear Alina and Hugo's footsteps retreating down the hall. The past had come knocking, but he had slammed the door shut. In the silence that followed, Shepard moved back to the window and stared out at the city lights. He had built his life from the rubble they left behind. He would not let their pleas drag him back. Not now. Not ever. The courthouse buzzed with the chatter of spectators, reporters, and curious onlookers. The case had attracted attention, transforming the proceedings into a twisted spectacle of scandal, betrayal, and revenge. Shepard walked into the courtroom with measured steps, his expression cold and unreadable. He was dressed sharply in a dark suit, projecting strength and calm confidence. Across the room, Alina sat at the plaintiff's table, looking far more fragile. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear, but she barely reacted. She kept her eyes on Shepard, a mix of desperation and defiance in her gaze. The judge called the court to order. We're here today to hear the case of Alina Harper versus Shepard Harper, regarding allegations of abandonment and financial neglect. Alina's lawyer, a man with a practiced air of self-righteousness, stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, my client has been left destitute by the actions of her former husband, Shepard Harper. He abandoned her and their son without a word, drained their joint accounts, and left them to struggle alone. Shepard's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel Nguyen, rose in response. Your Honor, we intend to demonstrate that the plaintiff's claims are not only false, but a calculated attempt to manipulate this court and extort my client. We have compelling evidence of infidelity, financial misconduct, and more. The judge nodded curtly. Proceed. The lawyer began, painting a picture of a struggling mother and son, abandoned and left to suffer. Alina sniffled at the appropriate moments, her eyes downcast. "I did everything I could for our son," she said tearfully, clutching a handkerchief. Shepard walked out and never looked back. When it was Shepard's turn to speak, he stood, hands clasped in front of him. "I didn't abandon my family," he said, his voice low but firm. "I left a woman who betrayed me with my own brother. I left after discovering they had been stealing from me and planning to run away together." There was a ripple of murmurs in the courtroom. Shepard stepped forward, handing a thick folder to the judge. "Inside, Your Honor, you'll find bank records, statements showing unauthorized withdrawals from our joint account, and plans Alina and Jared made to use those funds for themselves." Alina's lawyer stood. "Objection, Your Honor. This is an attempt to smear my client's character and distract from the real issue." The judge raised a hand, silencing him. "Overruled. Continue, Mr. Harper." Shepard locked eyes with Alina. "For years, I worked double shifts to support my family, sacrificing time, health, and my dreams. In return, I was betrayed by my wife and my own brother. I didn't leave her with nothing. She stole everything first." Alina's face turned pale, but she regained her composure quickly. "Shepard, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I was wrong, but I was desperate." "You're still desperate," Shepard replied coldly. Rachel stood next, bringing forth the DNA results. "Your Honor, we'd also like to submit evidence regarding paternity." There was a collective intake of breath as the DNA test results were handed to the judge. Shepard's voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the steel in his tone. "The boy Alina claims I abandoned is not even biologically mine. She lied to me about that, too." The courtroom erupted into hushed whispers. Alina's lawyers scrambled to regain control. "This isn't relevant." The judge's gavel came down. "Order. I'll decide what's relevant." Alina's tears flowed freely now. "Shepard, I didn't know. I thought Evan was yours." Shepard shook his head slowly. "You thought? That's what you have to say? I gave you everything I had. You gave me lies." At the back of the courtroom, Evan shifted uncomfortably. He had sat, rigid and silent, for most of the trial. Now, he rose suddenly, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. "I can't listen to this anymore," he said, his voice cracking. "All of this, every word, is disgusting." He turned on his heel and stormed out. Alina reached for him, but he pulled away, the door slamming behind him. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a final judgment. When the trial resumed, Rachel presented a final piece of evidence: Jared's disappearance and abandonment of Alina long ago. "Your Honor," she said, "not only did Alina betray my client, but the man she left him for has already proven he wants nothing to do with her." The judge leaned forward, eyes hard. "Mrs. Harper, the evidence presented here is overwhelming. Your claims are dismissed." It was over. Alina sagged in her chair, all strength leaving her. The judge rose, and people began to file out of the courtroom. Alina stood shakily, trying to approach Shepard. "Shepard, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have nothing left." Shepard stared at her, his expression cold and unmoved. "You made your choices, Alina. Now live with them." Without another word, he turned and walked away. As he stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of the past 10 years seemed to lift, if only a little. Justice, in his eyes, had been served. But even as he moved forward, the echo of Alina's pleas stayed with him, a reminder of how deeply betrayal could cut, and how, even after victory, the scars still remained. Shepard sat on the edge of his sleek leather couch, reading a financial report. He had moved on from the courtroom battle with an unshakable resolve to leave the past behind. The victory had been decisive, and for a moment, it seemed like closure had finally arrived. That hope was shattered by the ringing of his doorbell. He paused, a twinge of irritation creasing his forehead. He knew who it would be. Taking a deep breath, Shepard walked to the door and opened it. Alina stood there, her shoulders hunched as if the weight of the world pressed down on her. Her eyes were swollen and red from crying, her once neat hair now a tangled mess. She wore a worn-out coat, far different from the confident woman she once was. Her hands trembled as she clutched at the doorframe. "Shepard," she began, her voice cracking. "Please." He said nothing, his face a mask of cold indifference. He stepped back just enough to let her enter, not out of kindness but to hear what she had to say. She shuffled inside, barely glancing at the luxury of his home. She didn't care. Her gaze was fixed solely on him. Once the door was shut, Alina dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I lost everything. Everything. Jared's gone. Evan won't even speak to me. I have nothing." Shepard crossed his arms, unmoved by her desperation. "You had everything once, Alina. You threw it all away." She reached for him, her hands shaking. I know I was wrong. I betrayed you, and I hurt you in ways I can't even describe. But please help me. I have nowhere else to go." Shepard took a step back, his eyes narrowing. "Why should I? You think words will erase years of lies and betrayal? You think they'll bring back what you stole from me? My trust? My family? My life?" Alina sobbed, her shoulders heaving. "I made terrible choices, but I loved you once. I loved us. I lost myself, and now, I'm lost for good." He watched her without pity. "Love? Was that what you called it when you were planning to run away with my brother? When you and Jared laughed behind my back and stole from me?" She flinched as if he had struck her. "I wasn't laughing, Shepard. I was scared. I didn't know how to stop it." "Convenient excuses," he said, his voice like ice. "You had no problem living off the money I earned. You had no problem lying to my face. You had no problem breaking me." Alina crawled closer on her knees, desperation pouring from every inch of her. "Please, Shepard," she begged. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just a chance. A chance to survive. I have no money, no place to stay. I'm begging you." Shepard's jaw clenched. He turned away, unable to look at her groveling any longer. Memories of their life together flashed in his mind. The good times, the laughter, the moments he thought were genuine. They twisted in his gut like a knife. He walked to the window, staring out at the city lights. "You're reaping what you sowed," he said quietly. "I warned you in that letter. I told you that you would get what you deserved." She crawled closer, her voice breaking. "I'm not proud of who I became. I lost myself. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Shepard. You were the only real thing in my life." Shepard turned back to her, his eyes blazing with anger. "Do you even understand what you did to me? I built everything from scratch, only to have it torn apart by you. And now you want me to save you?" She nodded desperately. "Yes, because I'm nothing without you." He approached her slowly, his steps deliberate. "And why should I care?" "Because deep down, you're not like me," she whispered. "You're better. You've always been better." The words hung between them, heavy with their shared past. Shepard's face hardened, and he leaned down, grabbing her arm to pull her to her feet. For a moment, he stared into her eyes, searching for something, remorse, regret, the woman he once loved. All he saw was a broken shell. "No," he said, letting go of her arm as if touching her burned him. "I won't be your savior. You don't deserve it." Alina staggered back, her knees giving way. She collapsed onto the floor, her face buried in her hands. "What am I supposed to do?" she whispered. Shepard stared down at her, his expression unreadable. "I don't care," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Figure it out. You're good at surviving." She looked up at him, hope flickering in her eyes one last time. "Shepard, please. Get out." His voice was cold, final. She hesitated, as if expecting him to change his mind. When he didn't, she rose shakily to her feet. Tears streamed down her face, and she wiped them away with trembling hands. She stumbled toward the door, pausing just before stepping out. "I truly am sorry," she whispered. The door closed behind her with a hollow thud, and Shepard exhaled deeply, as if releasing years of pent-up pain. He felt nothing, no joy, no relief, no satisfaction. Just emptiness. Turning away from the door, he moved back to his life, leaving Alina's desperate cries behind. The days after the courtroom drama were quiet for Shepard. The silence of his apartment, once a balm to his weary soul, now felt heavy and oppressive. The weight of everything, years of betrayal, court battles, seeing Alina at her lowest, pressed on him like an anchor. He stared at old photos he hadn't managed to throw away, memories of a life that once felt like a promise. He took one picture of him, Alina, and a young Evan at a park, tore it in half, and tossed it into the trash. It was time to let go, even if letting go was a slow burn. For months, Shepard worked relentlessly. His successful business demanded focus, and he gladly threw himself into it, using work as a shield against memories that refused to fade. But even success couldn't banish the emptiness gnawing at him. One evening, after a long meeting, Shepard walked alone through the city's park, the crisp evening air cutting through his suit. A street musician strummed a guitar nearby, his soulful melody drifting on the breeze. Shepard paused, listening. For once, he allowed himself to feel something: sadness, regret, hope. Anything but anger. "Beautiful song, isn't it?" a soft voice said beside him. Shepard turned, startled. A woman with striking eyes and a warm smile stood there, her hair dancing in the wind. She held a takeout coffee cup, steam curling from the lid. "Yeah," he said, nodding slowly. "It is. I'm Amora." She extended her hand, and Shepard shook it, feeling a strange warmth he hadn't felt in years. They sat together on a nearby bench, talking as strangers sometimes do, openly, honestly, without expectations. Shepard found himself laughing at her quick wit and easy humor. By the time they parted ways, he realized he hadn't thought about Alina or the past for hours. It was like taking a full breath of fresh air after being underwater for too long. The next few weeks saw Shepard and Amora meeting more often. She worked as a civil engineer and loved to sketch in her spare time. "It calms me," she said one afternoon, showing him a small notebook filled with designs and doodles. "Life's chaos, and this is my way of sorting it out." Shepard admired her work, her passion. In return, she asked about his. At first, he hesitated, unsure if he was ready to peel back the layers of his past for her to see. But one night, as they walked along a riverbank, he spoke. "My ex-wife betrayed me. With my brother." Amora listened without judgment. "That must have been hell," she said softly. "It was." He swallowed hard, surprised at how the words came easily. "I thought I'd never trust anyone again. Sometimes I still don't." Amora reached for his hand. "You don't have to trust all at once," she said. "Step by step, right?" Shepard nodded, his chest tight. "Yeah, step by step." Slowly, Shepard began to open up. He let Amora in, bit by bit, piece by piece. Trusting again was like walking a tightrope, every step uncertain. But Amora was patient. She didn't push, didn't pry. She offered warmth when he needed it and space when he pulled back. Together, they built something new, not a replacement for what he had lost, but a fresh beginning. He started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could love and be loved without fear. One afternoon, Shepard brought Amora to meet Johnny, his old friend from the factory who had stood by him through the worst of it. Over beers and laughter, Johnny gave Shepard a knowing look. "You've come a long way, man." Shepard nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "I have." Meanwhile, the shadows of Shepard's past were crumbling. Alina struggled to make ends meet. The court's ruling had left her with nothing, and Jared's disappearance had only deepened her despair. She moved from one dingy apartment to the next, taking whatever work she could find. Each night, she sat alone, replaying the moments that led her here, the choices, the lies, the betrayal. Regret consumed her, but no amount of tears could change what was done. Evan, now a young man, grew colder by the day. The years of instability, lies, and resentment had left deep scars. He blamed his parents for everything: the broken promises, the humiliation, the poverty. He stopped talking to Alina, instead spending his days with the wrong crowd, looking for distractions and trouble. When the police arrested him for vandalism one night, he refused to call his mother for help. "Why should I care?" he snapped at a friend who asked. "She ruined everything." Shepard learned about Evan's arrest from an old acquaintance. For a moment, a wave of guilt threatened to crush him. But he shook it off. Evan was not his responsibility. He never had been. Alina's choices, Jared's choices, they led them all here. Shepard couldn't change that. When Amora asked about the boy, Shepard sighed. "He's not mine. He never was." "That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt," she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. No, it doesn't, Shepard admitted. But I can't save them. I don't owe them anything. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the past palpable. But it was a different kind of silence now, one that held space for healing. In the months that followed, Shepard and Amora continued to build their life together. He sold his old apartment and bought a house with room for her sketches and dreams. On a quiet evening, he proposed, nervous but hopeful. When she said yes, Shepard knew he was ready to let go of the ghosts for good. Somewhere, far away, Alina's cries went unheard, and Evan's anger deepened. But for Shepard, the storm had passed. He had found peace, hope, and love again, and he would never let betrayal define him again. Step by step, he had moved on. The morning air was crisp when Shepard retrieved his mail, expecting the usual bills and business correspondence. Instead, his fingers paused over an unfamiliar envelope bearing shaky handwriting. Intrigued, he tore it open. Inside was a short letter from Jared. The words were hurried and desperate. Shepard, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I have no one left. I'm sick, bedridden. I need to make things right. Please come. You deserve to know the truth. Jared Shepard's first instinct was to crumple the letter and toss it away. Jared, his brother, the man who had ripped apart his life? What right did he have to ask for anything? But as he stood there, staring at the letter, curiosity gnawed at him. There were too many unanswered questions, too many years filled with bitterness. If there was a chance to close this chapter, truly close it, maybe it was worth hearing what Jared had to say. The nursing home was small, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The smell of antiseptic and the low murmur of voices filled the air. A nurse directed Shepard to a dimly lit room at the end of the hall. There, Jared lay in bed, pale and gaunt. Time had not been kind. Illness had stripped him of his vitality. When Jared saw Shepard enter, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and shame. You came, Jared rasped, his voice weak. I didn't think you would. Shepard remained standing, his arms crossed over his chest. You've got 5 minutes, he said coldly. A flicker of pain crossed Jared's face. He nodded slowly, motioning for Shepard to come closer. I know I don't deserve your time, but I need you to understand. Alina, she wasn't who you thought she was. Shepard's eyes narrowed. Don't try to shift the blame. I'm not, Jared said quickly, his breath labored. I take responsibility for what I did. I betrayed you. But Alina, she played us both. I thought I loved her, but she used me, just like she used you. Explain, Shepard demanded, his voice sharp. Jared closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. It started small. She confided in me, told me you were neglecting her, that you were too busy with work. She said she felt invisible, unloved. I was stupid enough to believe her. Over time, she manipulated me. She wanted control over your money, your life. She talked about leaving you, about us starting over. I was a fool, Shepard. She never cared about me. She only wanted to destroy what you had. Shepard felt his fists clench. You're telling me this now? After everything? You expect me to feel sorry for you? No, Jared whispered. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm dying, Shepard. I have nothing left. I just needed you to know the truth. Shepard's jaw tightened, emotions swirling inside him, rage, sadness, exhaustion. You let her use you. You both made choices. Jared nodded, tears streaming down his face. I did, and I paid for it every day since. She left me, you know, took what little money we had and disappeared. I was nothing to her once she got what she wanted. The words hung heavy in the air. Shepard wanted to hate Jared, wanted to hold on to that anger. But standing there, looking at the broken man his brother had become, he felt only pity. I can't absolve you, Shepard said, his voice low but steady. You destroyed our family. I know, Jared whispered, but I needed you to hear it. I needed you to know she was the poison between us. Shepard turned to leave, pausing at the door. You have a lot to answer for. I can't forgive you, but I hope you find some peace. Jared nodded weakly, a hint of relief passing over his face. Thank you for hearing me out. As Shepard drove home, he replayed Jared's words in his mind. The betrayal had been deeper and more insidious than he had imagined. But in some twisted way, it also brought him a sense of closure. The years spent hating Jared, the years of feeling like everything had been his fault, it all shifted. Alina had poisoned their lives, yes, but Jared had been complicit. They both had been. The weight in Shepard's chest lightened, just a little. When he reached his house, Amora was waiting for him on the porch. She rose as he approached, concern etched on her face. "You're back." Shepard nodded, the exhaustion evident in his posture. "Yeah." She stepped closer, taking his hand in hers. "How did it go?" He took a deep breath. "It's complicated. Jared's dying. He wanted to talk. Told me things I didn't know." Amora squeezed his hand gently. "You don't have to carry it alone." "I know." He looked into her eyes, seeing only understanding and compassion. "It's strange. I thought hearing it would make me angrier. But I feel done. Tired. Like I'm ready to move on." "That's a good thing, isn't it?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I think it is." She wrapped her arms around him, and he held her close, feeling the warmth and comfort he'd long thought lost to him. Revenge had consumed too much of his life. Now he had something better, someone better to focus on. As they stood together, Shepard realized that second chances weren't just about love. They were about growth, about learning to let go of the pain that had defined him for so long. He kissed Amora's forehead, grateful for her presence. For the first time in years, he felt ready to step forward, leaving the ghost behind. Jared would pass away weeks later alone. Alina remained a shadow, consumed by her own choices. Shepard, however, chose a different path, one of healing, of love, of finding peace in the arms of someone who truly valued him. The truth, as twisted as it had been, no longer had power over him. It was just part of his story, not the end.